And here we are with another edition of Video from the Ville. I'm Dr. Charlie Greenawalt, and hopefully you're in my class in Public Administration in Government 241 at Millersville with me. Let's pick up where we left off. You took your exams just before the break, and we were on the verge of starting the chapter on leadership. So let's go ahead and look at leadership. This is where we're going to miss the in-class discussion quite a bit, because it's always interesting to hear your ideas on what constitutes a great leader and who might be a great leader and who might not be. It's one of the discussions I will miss having with you. Nonetheless, let me throw out a couple ideas for you and share some of the work that public administration theorists have done in leadership, and share those with you. When public administration tends to look at leadership and who might be a great leader, we tend to look at effectiveness. We believe that great leaders are effective leaders. Now, who might you consider to be an effective leader? Who might you consider to be an effective leader in world history? Who might you consider to be an effective leader in American history? I'd like you to get out your PowerPoints. Hopefully you've printed your PowerPoints out and you have them with you as we go through these video presentations. Or you have your pad, your other electronic devices up, and you have your PowerPoints right beside you as you listen to me on this particular video presentation. You find that on the first page of leadership, I have 3 pictures along the bottom of the page. And let's go through those 3 pictures. We're going to go through maybe a few examples. We're going to go through a few examples of who might be effective world leaders throughout history. The individual all the way to the left on the bottom of the page, seated with a massive beard. It's a statue. Who might that be? You can find that statue in Rome, and you can find it in St. Pietro Vicoli Cathedral, which is right across the street from the Forum. That is one of Michelangelo's most famous statues. That is a statue of Moses, a very effective leader. Who's in the middle? The individual in the middle, the marble bust, is of Pericles. Pericles, of course, was the famous Athenian statesman, military leader. And all the way on the right, at the bottom of the page, where we start our material on leadership, is another bust. And that bust looks a lot like Julius Caesar, but it's not. It's the individual who mentored Julius Caesar. This was the last individual who had served as a consul in the Roman Republic, and you find that he had was appointed dictator, and he gave up his dictatorial powers when the time came, and he actually returned power to the people of Rome. He was the last dictator of Rome who died peacefully in his sleep. He was not murdered or assassinated or executed. He was always about trying to return Rome to the ideals of the Republic through the Senate. And of course, this person is Sulla. This is the leader of the patrician, the property classes, who in the famous civil wars that he had with Marius, who was one of the leaders of the plebeian class, the non-property owning class. But Sulla was a very effective leader, brought an end to the civil wars, peace and prosperity to the Roman Republic, restored the Roman Republic before it began to evolve into the empire under the next set of leaders. Well, if we go to the next page on your PowerPoints, and you look at the statue that is all the way at the left of the page, there is the person that we were talking about a moment ago. There is Julius Caesar. who was quite an effective administrator, quite an effective leader, ruler, and military genius as well. So he is portrayed there as well. He is the step between the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire. Who's the person in the middle at the bottom of the page? That, of course, is Charlemagne, who helped restore the Roman Empire in the West after it fell in 476 AD. And we find that Charlemagne, of course, brought together major portions of Germany and France. France was known as Gaul at the time. And he establishes his capital in Aachen. You can still go to Aachen, go into the cathedral, you go onto the second floor, and you can see Charlemagne's throne there. His throne was made of wood. He was trying to emphasize that he was a man of the people. Who is the ruler on the bottom all the way to the right? That's our first female leader that I've portrayed. And of course, that picture, from the picture you might know her, of course, is Queen Elizabeth I of England, the monarch who was the daughter of King Henry VIII and who led the English to victory against the Spanish Armada. We go on to the next page on our PowerPoint presentation, and there's three more individuals that we'll conclude with as effective world leaders. Person all the way at the left is, of course, Napoleon. Napoleon, as we all know, was a great military genius. Just had some bad timing regarding the arrival and dispersal of forces at Waterloo. But other than that, was one of the most successful military leaders in world history. And of course, French law and law in most French territories today, including Louisiana, is based on his famous Napoleonic Code. But Napoleon was a tireless and very effective administrator. We find the individual that's portrayed in the middle of the page at the bottom with a Union Jack in the back of him, as of course you know him as Sir Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was voted as the greatest English leader of all, the greatest British leader of all time, and in some polls voted the greatest leader of the 20th century. The last figure on the page, at the bottom on the right-hand side, is someone who I wish we could be together in class. I'd love to hear your guesses as to who that person is. That person we're very grateful to for helping us finish the 20th century in peace and prosperity in the Western world, and that is the leader who replaced Adolf Hitler in Germany eventually. This is Konrad Adenauer. Konrad Adenauer, K-O-N-R-A-D, Konrad Adenauer, A-D-E-N-E-A-U-R, Konrad Adenauer. He brought Germany, led them through the perilous years after the Second World War, and denazified the country. Then we go on to effective American leaders on the next page, next PowerPoint slide. And under effective American leaders on the first slide, I have 6 individuals portrayed. The one on the top column, the top row, all the way on the left is, of course, the person who was responsible for the birth of the American Republic. America today still does not exist without George Washington. George Washington is the essential American. So long as he kept a force in the field during the Revolutionary War, the revolution was alive. And that is certainly what he accomplished. He won fewer battles than he lost, but he won the last one at Yorktown, and that's the one that counted. But George Washington knew he was a model for his fellow Americans, and therefore he developed a little guidebook to behavior. You can still buy it today. You can buy it on Amazon, or you can go down to the Daniel Boone Homestead just west of Reading. They sell it there. It's a little red, hard-bound manual on the characteristics of good behavior. And what Washington did was every day he took one of those principles and he would practice it and focus on it all day. We go on from Washington to the middle of the top row, which some individuals believe that he is the most important person in American history, but without the birth of the American Republic, that might be a hard argument to win. But of course, that individual is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln saves the Union during the Civil War, and of course pays for his service with his life when he is assassinated at Ford's Theater. The last person on the top row, all the way on the right, is of course Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass is one of the greatest public speakers America's ever had. Of course, the leaders of the abolitionist movement, the movement to end slavery, and was a very important political leader in the 19th century of America. On the bottom row, all the way at the left, is, of course, the first person all the way on the left is Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt may be considered to be the most charismatic of our presidents perhaps since Abraham Lincoln. Certainly in the 20th and 21st centuries, Teddy Roosevelt was bigger than life. He was a man's man, a cowboy's cowboy, a president's president. Every area of his life that he had to engage in, any area of life he overcompensated and became an expert at. He was sickly as a child, so he had a gym installed in his bedroom, and he developed a very strong, physically fit body. Because he was so sickly, he had to go to the west during the summertime for clean air. And so he became a great rider, a horse rider, in the Dakotas and in Montana over the summer. He became a great marksman. He became a great roper of cattle and a great cowboy during that time in the West. What many people don't know is that later in life he wrote a 23-volume history on American history. He was a painter, he was an explorer. The French president used to lament that, oh, Teddy, every time I go to the White House, he drags me to the Rose Garden and he wants to throw a medicine ball with me, and he does it just so he can knock me down, knock me over. Roosevelt was larger than life, to be sure, and a very effective leader of the progressive movement. And of course, under Teddy Roosevelt in the United States, we expanded, we strengthened, we expanded the National Park Service, we established the Food and Drug Administration, and we certainly consolidated our position as a world leader. In the middle of the bottom row is Susan B. Anthony, of course, a leader of the suffragette movement, one of the most important individuals in obtaining the vote, the vote for women in the United States. All the way at the end of the column on the bottom, on the right, is of course Teddy Roosevelt's cousin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Of course, FDR leads us through the Great Depression, leads us through the Second World War. And American government as we know it today is largely a result of the government that was established by FDR to deal with the effects of the Great Depression and deal with the Second World War. Remember, what are the three great expansions of American government in our history? After the New Deal under FDR, the Great Society under Franklin Delano, under Lyndon Baines Johnson, and then, of course, that massive spending spree under President Obama, where we borrow and spend more money than all the presidents combined in our history. Again, we still don't have a moniker for that spending spree of President Obama's. Well, the last page is the last group of effective American leaders that I have. The person portrayed all the way to the left is the Supreme Allied Commander. During the Second World War, one individual that could bring the French, the British, the Americans together in an effective fighting force, and that was Dwight David Eisenhower. Dwight David Eisenhower would not only win the war in Europe during the Second World War and be able to bring all the sides together in harmony, but he became the first Supreme Allied Commander of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in the aftermath of the Second World War. From there he went on to become the president of Columbia University. Only then is he approached by the Republican Party, who are worried about maintaining a two-party democracy, and they ask him to please represent the Republican Party in the presidential election of 1952 to maintain a two-party system in America. And Ike eventually agrees, and of course wins that election in 52 and wins re-election in 56. If we go on the bottom of that column, the bottom of that column then is Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King, who is a great and inspirational civil rights leader, who was the most important person perhaps in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. You see him there as he waves to some of the crowd from the Lincoln Memorial on the special day when he led the American people to Washington to protest for civil rights. Of course, to his right, on the right-hand side of the page, is another leader. Not all great leaders in American history are military or political. Many are businessmen and community leaders. Of course, this is one of our most famous business leaders. The person portrayed all the way on the right is, of course, Henry Ford. Henry Ford changed the transportation in America forever, and therefore changed the face of America and how it would develop. That we needed an elaborate and extensive road system. But Henry Ford modernized and revolutionized manufacturing with using conveyor belts and the conveyor belt system to build cars so that the average family could afford a car. The last leader that's portrayed is in the middle at the top, and that is, of course, President Ronald Reagan. President Reagan, of course, had been the president of the Screen Actors Guild. He went on from that to become the two-term governor of the state of California, and eventually secures the Republican nomination for the presidency in 1980 and 84 and wins both of those elections. He is able to lead America out of a period of time where we had double-digit inflation rates, double-digit unemployment rates, double-digit interest unemployment, and forgetting what the third item was, unemployment, inflation, it doesn't matter. But we were experiencing the Iranian hostage crisis at this time, and Reagan promises to end it. In fact, Ayatollah Khomeini, just to poke Jimmy Carter in the eye, releases all of our diplomats that were being held for over a year within an hour of Ronald Reagan being inaugurated as Jimmy Carter leaves office. But Ronald Reagan rebuilt the strength of the American military and brought hope and prosperity back to the United States. Well, having gone through that pantheon of effective world and American leaders, and I'm sure I left many leaders out who you would point to and who you could make a great case for being an effective leader. What are the qualities of an effective leader? Let me take a break right here. Let's start again. We'll pick up where we left off. What are the qualities of leadership? Qualities of leadership. First and foremost of all the qualities of leadership would be intelligence. You have to be intelligent to be an effective leader in the long haul, or you're not going to be very successful. We find that if you're intelligent, hopefully you might also have the ability to be a very good speaker. Verbal ability. The verbal ability of a Ronald Reagan, the verbal ability of a Winston Churchill, the verbal ability of a Jesse Jackson, the verbal ability of a Martin Luther King. These all set these individuals apart from the ordinary rank and file individuals who might aspire to leadership. And I'm going to show you some examples of great speeches as we conclude this section. At the very end, I'll put them up on screen. There's a link that you can tap on your PowerPoint. That will take you to the famous speech, perhaps the most famous speech ever made in the English language, of King Henry V as he's addressing his troops before the famous Battle of Agincourt in France. He has a tired and beleaguered army that is outnumbered 5-1 by the French. They would like to simply return to England, and the French are determined to crush them. Let's look at how and listen to how King Henry V rallies his troops, and ultimately they massacre the French because they have a new version of the English longbow. In the English longbow, the arrows are able to penetrate the armor of the French knights. The French knights are newly equipped and are so numerous that the English have many archers and lots of arrows, and through a hail of arrows they're able to win Agincourt. Well, verbal ability. What does Henry say to spur his troops on? And we'll look at some other speeches as well. Enterprise. Enterprise is very important for anyone who would aspire to be a successful and effective leader. To take the initiative. Enterprise. Optimism. Great leaders believe that their leadership makes a difference. Of course, this is why Franklin Delano Roosevelt decided to run for a third term and run for a fourth term to lead the country through the Second World War. He believed that he, better than any other American who was present on the political scene at that time, could lead us to victory, and it was important that we had that leadership continuity. So optimism, energy. A great leader is someone that shows tremendous energy. Napoleon supposedly slept very little, and his tent was a beehive of activity from morning to night. We find, as far as energy is concerned, there's a brand new book out about Winston Churchill's first year of leading Great Britain in the Second World War, from the time he's sworn in on the day that the Germans invade the Low Countries in France. From that point to his first year in office before America gets into the war. If you read a book by Eric Larson called The Splendid and the Vile, you can see the energy that Churchill had and that he gave to the execution of his offices. Thomas Edison was a great inventor and a great leader for the scientific community. Thomas Edison slept very little and worked all the time, and ceaselessly conducted experiments well into the night to try to find the results that he needed. And lastly, composure, the ability not to be rattled by the passage of events. Look at the composure that President Lincoln had during the Civil War. The Union lost battle after battle at the beginning of the war, but yet Lincoln was not rattled and continued on his course and continued to hold the North together and to lead the North to victory during the Civil War. Composure. We find there are three qualities that we tend to believe that a great leader has, and we might be mistaken about this. Your textbook over the years has changed its mind about some of these, but let me be clear about this. Number one is charisma. What is charisma? Charisma is nothing more than the ability that a leader has to have others identify with him or her. Charisma. Charisma is a quality which can work against a leader as well as for a leader. If you're a terribly charismatic person, as Hitler was considered to be by the German people, it also inhibits communication. It inhibits advisors from telling you the truth. In the last year and a half of the Second World War, many times Hitler's advisors were too scared to tell him what was really happening on the Western and Eastern Front. It can thwart communication as well. Charisma is not necessarily a great sign of a great leader. Technical expertise. We tend to think of great leaders as having all the facts and figures at their fingertips. Probably Jimmy Carter, being a graduate of the Naval Academy, could tell you how many nuts and bolts there were in a nuclear submarine. Ronald Reagan could not. Yet you find that Ronald Reagan was a far more effective leader than Jimmy Carter. Technical expertise isn't necessarily required of an effective leader. And lastly, we have decisiveness. Many individuals think that great leaders can make a decision on the spur of the moment, that just like that, they can decide what's the right thing to do. In fact, Lincoln would mull over what the next actions should be by the Union and by the Union Army for days and sometimes weeks at a time before a decision was forthcoming. Decisiveness, again, is not necessarily a sign of effective or great leadership. Now, in our textbook, it does talk about other activities that are useful to establish effective and great leadership. What might they be? Let's talk about 5 things. Let's look at first, marshaling resources. This was one of the greatest gifts that George Washington had. During the course of the Revolutionary War, he had to marshal resources constantly from the wealthiest persons in the colony, whether it be John Hancock, and from the wealthiest colonies, whether it be Virginia or North or South Carolina. Virginia, of course, during the Revolution was the most populous state, and therefore it was perhaps the richest state. And you find that one of the things that made Washington such a natural selection to be the leader of the Revolutionary Army was that he is from the most populous state. But marshaling resources, someone who knows how to do that and is good at bringing together resources in any crisis. The second activity that's useful for leadership would be budgeting your time wisely. Time, of course, is finite. It's the most precious resource that any of us have, and we need to use our time as effectively as we possibly could. Virginius Dabney was the great editorialist for the Richmond Times-Dispatch and one of the greatest experts on the life of Thomas Jefferson. Virginius Dabney, in his work, would keep a diary every day of every moment of the day and how he was using it. He could go back in his diary and tell you what he was doing 20 years ago at any time of the day. He had a diary every day of what he was doing and how he was using his time, budgeting time wisely. Thirdly, we need to look at another useful activity for leadership called ruffling the waters. Ruffling the waters would be throwing a bit of cognitive dissonance into the ranks of your followers, into your organization, into your country. It's so that they are thinking things through again. So they're taking another look at the situation. So they're seeing if they examining if they missed any factors the first time through. Ruffling the waters is something that Franklin Delano Roosevelt did as well as anyone. He would ask for a report to be done. He would bring someone into the room after the report was done, bring the writer into the room, ask them if they had included everything that they should have, and ask them to take another look at it. And they would go back once or twice, take another look at the matter. He may even then call the writer in and say, we're going to have the same report done by another member of the staff. Again, trying to lead to a situation where every one of his advisors was producing at the highest level possible. That's good for the outcome, but over time it can bring down employee morale if you use it too much. Ruffling the waters. Fourthly, is related to budgeting time wisely, putting first things first. How many of you on a weekend and you're trying to accomplish things will make a list of things to do? I know I do, and I may have 10 things on the list. What will I do first? I'll do all those things that can be easily done so I can quickly cross off 9 things from my list, and I think I'm making great progress. But that last thing that is there to do is probably the most difficult one. It's the one I should have done first. It's the most important one. It's the one that would have benefited from me addressing it when I am at my freshest. I'm at my freshest, and I have my best ideas for the day. Maybe that is why you always need to put first things first. Put first things first. Fifth and finally, again, another thing that Washington was quite good at, another thing that FDR was quite good at, and that is increasing friends and decreasing enemies. As we go through life, we need to do everything we can to enlarge our circle of friends and decrease our circle of enemies. And you find that this is important because our enemy today could be our friend tomorrow, or someone that we might need help from in the future. So we should do everything we can to always increase our circle of friends and decrease our circle of enemies. Well, let's go on on the subject of leadership and look at two very important theories of leadership. This is the examination of Theory X and Theory Y. Douglas McGregor, and you see a picture of him in your PowerPoints. Douglas McGregor wrote a famous book in 1960 called The Human Side of Enterprise. And in The Human Side of Enterprise, what he does is he puts forth these notions of Theory X and Theory Y. Theory X is the traditional theory of personnel management. Theory X says the manager is the active agent to motivate people and to modify their behavior so it will be in accordance with the needs of the organization. Let me repeat that. Theory X is the traditional theory of personnel management. It believes that the manager is the active agent for motivating people and to modify their behavior so that it's in accordance with the needs of the organization you're serving. What are the assumptions of Theory X? The assumptions of Theory X are twofold. Number one, that man is resistant to change. And number two, man is not only resistant to change, but that number two, man is self-centered, man lacks ambition, man tries to work as little as possible, and man dislikes responsibility. So man is self-centered, lacks ambition, tries to work as little as possible, and dislikes responsibility. Those are the assumptions of Theory X. Theory Y, on the other hand, Theory Y is based on the work of Abraham Maslow, M-A-S-L-O-W, Abraham Maslow, M-A-S-L-O-W. Remember, what was the most important work that for public administration of Abraham Maslow. Of course, it's the notion of the self-actualization, and his hierarchy of human needs. Self-actualization is at the top of his hierarchy of human needs. You find that, what does Abraham Maslow argue? Abraham Maslow argues that any met need that we have is not a motivator. The only motivators of human behavior are unmet needs. And if we can somehow appeal to the unmet needs of our employees and of public servants, that you'll be able to motivate them, inspire them to a much greater degree, much more effectively. Well, theory Y is based on this hierarchy of human needs, and it argues that social, self-esteem, and self-actualization needs are the most important for understanding human behavior. You find that Theory X, the manager is trying to motivate you by saying, unless you do this, you'll be fired. It's always a coercive type of relationship. In Theory Y, you are trying to combine the needs of the employees with the needs of the employer. The assumptions of Theory Y are, by being employed, people's physiological needs and your safety needs are being met. But the second assumption is the employer needs to use, therefore, the unmet needs, social, self-esteem, and self-actualization needs. They will be the motivators of behavior, and you need to tap into them. To talk about the hierarchy of human needs, it is a pyramid. You see a slide in your PowerPoints with it. What are the most basic needs that we have? Most basic need we have is for oxygen, right? Oxygen first, water second, food third, shelter fourth. These are our physiological needs, the needs that we have to stay alive. So they are at the bottom of the pyramid. The next level above that is security needs. We need to be secure from walking into the street or onto our porch and being attacked or murdered by a fellow citizen. So we need the state to have established law and order. So these are security needs. The next need that we have on the hierarchy of human needs would be social needs. Humans are animals, just as a horse or a lion or an elephant would be an animal, so are human beings. And therefore, we like to have someone to share the triumphs and tragedies of life with. We group together and we seek to help others and have them help us from time to time. But we need to socialize with one another, so social needs. It leads to the last two levels of the of the pyramid. The next level would be self-esteem needs. Self-esteem needs we all have. We all want to be recognized as special within our organization, within our group of acquaintances, for example, or within our community organization. We all seek some special recognition. We may want to be the best dancer, the best dressed, the funniest, the strongest, the best dressed, whatever the case may be. But self-esteem needs would be next. Finally, at the top of the pyramid, Maslow came up with this notion of self-actualization. And the notion of self-actualization is very much a 20th and 21st century concept, because up until this time, the average person would never have an opportunity to do this. They're too busy trying to feed themselves and their families, to clothe themselves and their families, and sometimes to protect themselves and their families from attack, whether it be on the western frontier or some other situation in one of the other countries in the world. But self-actualization is best portrayed as being all that you can be, being all that you can be, developing all your God-given talents to the greatest extent possible. That's what self-actualization is. The Army, before they have these recent appeals for recruitment for Army Strong or an Army of One, used to be reliant upon the slogan, be all that you can be. Be all that you can be in the Army. Sorry for the singing. But it was a very effective slogan. It was a very effective campaign. And they'd show troops jumping out of an airplane and parachuting. Be all that you can be in the Army. Self-actualization. Okay? Well, how do we compare Theory X and Theory Y? Well, as the slide shows you, with a picture of the book there, The Human Side of Enterprise, and a picture of Douglas McGregor, Theory X relies on what? It relies on the external control of human behavior. Theory Y relies on what? Theory Y relies on self-direction. How do we apply Theory Y? If we're going to use Theory Y, try to use Theory Y as a leader in our organization, how do we do it? Well, one way is we decentralize our workplace and we delegate responsibility. We've talked about this before. What work do you delegate? You delegate everything you can. You delegate everything you can to the lowest level possible. Will give those people much more meaningful work. They will accomplish far more than you could if you kept all the tasks for yourself to do. Application of Theory Y. We can also realize Theory Y through job enlargement. People at Volvo for years and years were bored out of their minds with their jobs. You would be on the production line and you might take a driver's side rearview mirror and put it on the car as it goes by. And for hours on end, months on end, years on end, all you would be doing is screwing that rearview mirror on. Well, Volvo solved this problem of, if you will, a staleness that would develop among the employees, and they put the employees in teams. So there was Team X, Team Y, Team Z, and when a car was done, the team would be listed on a plaque in the car and the people's names would be there. But what happened was you would rotate under this team idea. For a month you might put on a rearview mirror. The next month you might put in the exhaust. The next month you might put the tires on the car. But you were doing something different every month so that you would maintain a freshness of your job. And that is job enlargement. Third and finally, we can apply Theory Y through participatory decision making. Participatory decision making is just getting everyone involved with the workplace, trying to come up with common solutions to vexing problems. For example, while I was at Hershey Chocolate, this would have been in the summer of 1972. We were led into conference rooms twice during that summer, and it was everyone in the department went in together, and when we went in a room together, all our titles and all our job designations and responsibilities were left outside the room. In that room, we were simply asked for ideas. What are the best ways that we can think of to improve the product and to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of the production process? And we were rewarded for good ideas. But that would be an example of participatory decision making. The major problem with the utilization of Theory Y in the public sector comes down to the whole business, ultimately, of accountability. We can do these things in the public sector, but we remember we have to be accountable to the public for the results that we find. Okay, let's take a break here and let's go to the computer and take a look at some great speeches. Okay? Just a moment's break.
I stopped it.
Okay.